welcome to this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. Thank you, Clyde. I'm going to do this fairly quick because the subject matter, I'm pretty sure, will probably be attacked from outside because it's a very, very serious subject matter that doesn't get discussed. And I'm talking about the four stages of basically ideological subversion, which has actually been going on in the United States for a long time. And so I want to break them down as quickly as possible and simply as possible so that we can understand how we got to this place. And when I mean this place, I mean where we have a president of the United States who is so obviously an asset of the Russians, of Vladimir Putin. And you notice I use the word asset because he does fit that term. It's not just that he does what we look at and say, "Oh, he's awful subservient to Putin." No, he does Putin's what Putin wants him to do. And we are actually, in my opinion, in a state where what we thought of as the US government, it no longer exists. What is going on in the United States of America is the equivalent of a coup. Everything that has been fought for the last 50, 60 years to um, attempt to bring the United States closer to being what Martin Luther King said. We just want you to do what you said on paper. Okay? And all of that's being stripped away. All of that. The privileges and the so-called rights and the programs and the policies, they're literally being stripped away. And we're seeing things being done today that it leaves the media, it leaves some politicians and a lot of regular people with our mouths open because he's doing things that are of a dictatorship. He's flaunting the law and he's doing it with impunity. So let me get into this real quick. See, what happened was the KGB years ago set out what they called the four steps or stages of ideological subversion. And what does that mean? It means to subvert or undermine the ideology. And ideology is what? It's the belief system. It's the belief system of what Americans, by and large, believe. And they said those four steps or four stages are: one, to demoralize, to destabilize. The third stage is crisis, and the fourth stage is normalization. So we're going to look at this. What does that mean? Let's look at demoralization first. Okay. It deals with the idea of what is normal. Demoralization, getting people not to care about their country or to learn about it. Um, it entails either not teaching children about the civic system and how it was founded. I don't know how many of you all ever had civics in school. We used to have it in elementary school, civics, and then we had some in high school. It was the idea of what a citizen, what the responsibilities of a citizen were, as well as what privileges, and they used to say sometimes rights, but they're basically privileges that you should expect as a citizen. Okay? And so they stopped doing civics classes apparently at some point. So kids growing up today, they don't learn about civics, including civics with things like uh, how to treat people. Okay, how to treat people in a civil manner, and that's where we get the term civil rights. Okay, they turned that into the civil rights movement, and y'all heard some of y'all heard me before. It was not the civil rights movement. It was a desegregation movement because black people said, oh, hold it. If the law says that we have the right to access services and institutions that are public, paid for with our tax dollars, if they are segregated, that is against federal law. And we should be able to desegregate these places, public places. That's why it was public libraries and public schools and public swimming pools and public parks and even places that serve the public. See, a sit-in it wasn't trying to force integration. What the sit-ins were about was going into public places, places that serve the public, that did not allow people, black people, to be served. And so they would go in and sit in these places because it was the right, it was the law that they had to be served. And so they attempted to desegregate these places. They weren't trying to integrate. That was a term that got turned around and used against us, really, because the term integration, it um, it incited white backlash because the term integration caused white people, many white people, to feel that they were losing something to us. Okay? And so that's a part of what's called demoralization. Um, so they stopped teaching children about civics and how the country was truly founded to whitewashing it uh, with stupid stuff like how the founding fathers, who they were and what they did. Um, like, for an example, not explaining all about George Washington, the truth, he was a slave owner and all those things, but doing stuff like saying, well, he had wooden false teeth and he could not tell a lie and he cut down a cherry tree and told his father the truth. That's nonsense. But if you ask a lot of Americans, what do they know about George Washington? I guarantee you they're going to talk about the cherry tree. I cannot tell a lie. Eh, okay. Um, Now, this was a brainwashing process. And what happened is that it worked so well that millions, literally millions of people in this country today refuse to accept facts, logic, or reason, even when it's presented to them in plain sight. That's how you had uh, 60 million people vote for Donald Trump. In spite of what he showed us from the beginning, he's never denied who he is. He's a liar, he's a cheat, he's a crook, he's a racist, he's a misogynist, he's sexist. He's shown us that. So how in the heck did 60 million people go and vote for him? Well, it was a deep process. It wasn't just from them being brainwashed. It also had a lot of help from the Russians. Okay? Um, but it's other areas. For an example, there are a lot of Americans who believe that there's no such thing as climate change or global warming. They think, oh, that's just made up. Okay, um, and see, the Russians were all involved in this. Normal and deviant behavior. Okay, the moral code of a culture. Think about those things. What is normal? Well, when we were growing up, those of us who are over 50, for an example, there were certain things that we believed to be moral standards. Now, those moral standards have been eaten away. For an example, Hitler. There was no time when I was growing up that Hitler would have been brought into the mainstream uh, as an acceptable thing. The neo Nazis and all of that, they were not allowed to be out in forefront. Okay, now years ago you had the Klan, and they were very big in this country, marching on Washington with thousands of supporters and Klans people, men and women. But you didn't have the Nazis. Okay, so at some point, even though there were millions of people who supported the World War II, which was against the Nazis, then you had a group of people in this country who became what they call neo Nazis or new Nazis, and the Nazis and the Klan began to work together. How does that happen? It happens through brainwashing, and it happens to people in such to such a degree that they refuse to accept fact, logic, or reason. Okay? Now, the Russians knew that all this works on human nature, that once humans uh, have the same idea bombarded into their heads by sources that they trust, then they will tend to have a very hard time changing this belief, even when presented with proof, until their actual life is on the line and it's too late. There are people who say today, well, how is it that these Trump supporters support him even when he does stuff against them? It's because they don't see him the same way you and I see him. They see him in a different way because their brains have been whitewashed is what I call it. Okay? Ideological subversion is the process uh, which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. That's why we see it, because it's right in our face. Okay? All you have to do, all the mass media has to do, is basically open their eyes and they can see it. But the problem is that number one, media people, they work for somebody, and the people they work for tell them what to do and what to think and what to say. And so we have to understand this. The process of demoralization is to change the perception of reality. To change the perception of reality. That's why those of us who see what's going on, we sometimes have to shake our head because we say, what in the heck? Because we see that there's been changes in what is being projected as reality. We woke up one day and the president of the United States was a fool, a liar. And we most of us sat there for a few minutes when we first woke up. We went to sleep hoping that something would change overnight. But when we woke up, the nightmare was real. And we kept saying, no, this can't be real. This can't be real. Yes, it was real. We walked it all the way down to the inauguration, hoping something would change, something would stop it. Nothing stopped it. And before we knew it, January 20th came about, and this liar, this crook, this deviant personality, this uh, psychologically crazed person was administered the oath of office for the presidency of the United States. And we've been dealing with that ever since, as they steadily, him and his cronies, have been uh, dismantling the US government. And they have changed the perception of reality. And what it's done is it's caused people to not be able to come to sensible conclusions. The media, the mass media cannot tell us the truth of what's going on. That's why you got a dude who lies every day. And they count the lies. They tell us they count the what they call them misstatements. Uh, 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 they call them everything but what they are, lies. And he lies over and over again. And they treat it almost like it's a comedy, but it's our lives that are at stake. Okay? Now, once an idea is accepted as true, it requires both courage and humility to free one's mind from its grip. The lie, yeah. So that's why, because these people ain't courageous and they ain't got no humility. That's why once they decided to support Trump, they support him to the extent they say to the death. Now they don't mean that they're gonna die. They will kill those who say the man is a liar. People who point out the truth, they're willing to kill us. Okay? And they will defend the liars and the people who brought them there to our death. Yes. The demoralization of a country is a process of encouraging unrighteous behavior, of encouraging the condensation of moral character, and belittling those who take a high moral position. Understand that clearly so there's no confusion in your mind. That's what's been happening, a demoralization. Uh, they've been encouraging unrighteous behavior. When a man stands up in presidential debates and says things that are just outrageous, and they don't shut him down, but instead say, well, it's okay for him to say it because of freedom of speech. The thing about freedom of speech is that, yes, you may have freedom of speech, but you do have to deal with the consequences of what you say. It doesn't say you have freedom of speech and freedom from consequences. Okay? An effective program of ideological subversion is to ridicule or discount the moral ideas from which a country or a nation gets its common moral fiber or fabric. So, for an example, the country outwardly says, well, we're against racism, and so they give it lip service. We don't believe in racism. And so we will set up, even in the government offices, places where you can go if you feel you've been discriminated against, and they will investigate. And if this found out to be true, then they will support you and try to make you whole again. Okay. Um, but what has happened is that we've had such things as this. Um, hedonism. There's been a promotion through media hedonism. And what is that? That's a school of thought that argues that pleasure is the only intrinsic good. Think about it. We have been told for a long time through the media, through entertainment, that pleasure is the basic deal for everything. You're supposed to do everything for the pursuit of pleasure. Mm. Yeah, that's a deep thing because we have raised now two, actually going on three generations of people who believe that pleasure is the number one reason to do anything. That if it doesn't have pleasure as part of it, then it doesn't count. It's not something they want to deal with or want to promote. Okay? Um, I'll give you a good example. Sex. Sex is pursued for pleasure, not for the perpetuation of mankind. Okay? Um, for centuries, thousands of years, the number one purpose of sex was to procreate and continue the human beings. Secondarily, it was pleasurable, okay? But the primary reason to have sex wasn't for pleasure, it was to procreate. Then it got changed. And the change said, no, the only reason to have sex is for pleasure. And those that said, well, what about the procreation of mankind? And they went to work on doing two things. One was taking away the part of sex that creates human beings, they call it birth control, and working on other ways to procreate or to create human beings. Some people, some women, were designated not to be able to have sex for pleasure, but instead their only reason to exist was to pop babies out. Okay? Slavery did that. Think about it. The enslaved black women, they weren't supposed to have pleasure from the rape, right? Pleasure wasn't part of it. With those slave owners and slave masters who a lot of them had sex for their pleasure, but also as a matter of control. And many times it was to impregnate them so they could get them some more slaves. Okay? Let's be real. So pleasure wasn't for African African people in slavery. Um, and then they made it worse by making some women, some black women, be Jezebels who only existed to have sex and not for their own pleasure, but for the pleasure of men. All right, let me move on to the next thing. Uh, oh, I got to mention that propaganda is various forms of propaganda is used as a tool of demoralization because it influences opinion through the use of symbols, through the means such as rumors, stories, pictures, reports, and other means of social communication. Think about it, because we now have social networks, and they have been used very seriously as part of political and psychological warfare. They use deception, disinformation, agents of influence, and forgeries. And all of that is to destroy the morale of the people so that they get to the point where they question their own beliefs, they question their own actions. And then once you start doing that, then you can get people to do pretty much what is not in their best interest. And that's what has happened. Now, let's talk about the next stage, destabilization. See, what happens when you start destabilizing things, that's where it really gets funky. Destabilizing uh, it's used as a technique in brainwashing to disorient and disarm the victim. Destabilization can basically work this way. Um, the failure to acknowledge good work and value people's efforts. They start giving out meaningless tasks, removal of people from areas of responsibility without even telling them in advance, not discussing it with them, repeated reminders of blunders, and even if they're not blunders, you turn stuff into blunders, setting people up to fail, shifting of the goalposts without telling the victim, and persistent attempts to demoralize the victim. Now, what does that mean in reality? It means such things as this. What we may have thought was not normal in the past starts being made uh, something that is now not, it's not unnormal. So you see this graphic here with the little girls in costumes that we would have considered to be inappropriate in the past. Now you start seeing them being brought to the fore. And then you have things like transgenderism and all these things that shake up and change what has been the norms in the past. Then you have opiates. Now, when I was growing up, we had junkies, people who used heroin. They were junkies. They were considered criminals. Uh, Now we have it happening to way too many white young people, and so it's a crisis. It's not a, they're not criminals. They're sick. It's an illness, and we need to help them. Pedophilia, a disorder, not a crime. Now that's written by a woman, and you'll see this across the country. We've seen it across the country. To say, well, shaking up rape culture, there's one. A society or environment whose prevailing social attitudes have the effect of normalizing or trivializing sexual abuse. Okay? Um, Now, those little girls, you would think that their parents should have had something to do with this to say, no, this ain't right. But before you know it, it becomes, it starts messing with our norms. And then before you know it, you're on what's considered the wrong side. The wrong side. Mm. Um, if you speak up about certain things, you will be attacked. You're trying to hold them back from their free expression. Little girls should get to freely express themselves. Okay? Um, I mean, can I get any clearer that we've seen the destabilization, right? And once you destabilize a society, then you can move them to the next stage. And the next stage is called crisis. Crisis. You might even see it. Some people say we're in a state of crisis now. Because what is a crisis? A crisis is any event that is going to, or is expected to, lead to an unstable and dangerous situation affecting an individual, a group, a community, or a whole society. Wow. We've had global economic crisis. We've had crises in our community with violence. Uh, and that's one that really messes with black folks because we've had to deal with a type of violence both from the police and in many of our communities from young people, especially young black males. Some people feel it's gotten out of hand. For example, I live in Chicago, and I've been hearing this more in the last months, and I have to push back on it. When people say that Chicago is a war zone, Chicago is not a war zone. Now, there are certain neighborhoods that are under siege, but Chicago is not a war zone. If you know what a war zone is, you would never apply that to your community. Ask somebody in Iraq if they think that Chicago's a war zone. Ask the people who have had their homes destroyed and their people killed by National Guardsmen who were sent there without no idea what they were really there for, except for to quote, kill and restore order. You don't want National Guard, you don't want military people coming into your community. They are not, their job is not to serve and protect. So why do you send them in a civilian community? You send them in to create or to deal with a war-like situation. And that means they're going to do what? They're coming to restore order. What if it's already in order? What if it's only little small pockets of people that are doing certain stuff? They don't care. They come in and they take down the whole community. Now, a crisis basically has four characteristics, but here's the first three. The event is unexpected, basically a surprise. Two, it creates uncertainty. And we've seen that. We see it all the time nowadays. Because whether it's economic, whether it's physical, whether it's, whatever, the schools, jobs, the weather, okay? That graphic there talking about the European migrant crisis. Okay, people coming from countries where they fear what's going on in their country, they become refugees. Listen, it is not a joke when you see millions of people as refugees. What is causing all these millions of people to leave their homeland to go anywhere else other than where their home is? And I take it right back to our own communities here. What has caused so many people to become homeless in the land of plenty? For a long time, we had a problem with men mostly being homeless. But since the liberalization of the military, now we have literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of women who are veterans who are homeless. And in many cases, we're talking about women with children who are homeless. They're veterans. You have thousands of people who have jobs, but they don't make enough money on their jobs to be able to afford housing. So they live on the street. They live in their cars. They live in hotels. They live in shelters. This is going on in America. That's uncertainty for real. That's a crisis. And third, is seen as a threat to important goals. When people can't get their can't get when they can't make enough money on their job to be able to afford housing, medical care. Think about that. If you have children and you can't afford medical care, that's a crisis. That's a crisis because you go day for day hoping, praying that one of the children don't come down with something where you have to take them to the hospital. You hope and pray you don't come down with something that causes you to have to go to the hospital. If you go to the hospital, who's going to take care of the children? And you have thousands of people who face that every day. That fear. It's a stressor. And then what happens is crisis is a process of transformation where the old system can no longer be maintained. That means that the fourth defining quality of crisis is the need for change. Wow. Wow. You see, in the United States of America, we have actually been in crisis for some time, and it's called for a need for change. That's why you've had the presidential candidates for the last 25 years. All of them have used some form of expression as their slogan, the idea of change. Okay? Why? Because the old systems don't seem to work for everybody. If change is not needed, then you have a system which you call failure. See, if we don't need change, then we don't have a crisis, we got a failure. And so, what do? We have been trying to change this country since the 50s. And we've had some changes. That's why it's so disheartening to see the changes being taken back to what some people say is to a period in America where it was great. I don't know what period that was. When was America great? It has tried, some of us have tried to make it be great by living up to the principles. That's why we sat in, we laid in, we marched, we did all kinds of things and forced the government to try to live up closer to its highest ideals. And all the time that was happening, you had some people who were saying, hey, they're trying to take our stuff away because they saw change as being dangerous to them. Whew. Now, the last part. The last part is called normalization. And that's the scariest thing. Normalization is the gradual process through which unacceptable things become acceptable. And as that behavior is repeated without catastrophic results, it becomes the social norm. let's be clear on this. Let's take this apart a little bit. Normalization. White supremacy is becoming normal when you see thousands of people marching to defend the statues of Confederate soldiers who lost the war. They lost the war. Stop and think about that. See, we knew the Confederacy lost, but there was a whole bunch of people, a whole segment of this society who did not feel they lost. That's why they have the statues up, and that's why they praise and uphold the generals and the people of the Confederacy. That's why they celebrate the Confederacy. How do you celebrate the losing side? Okay? And now you make it normal. Sex play with a child. This is a writer in a Salon magazine. That's becoming normalized. Black Matters. That was some propaganda in Facebook paid for by the Russians. Okay? Lies become normal. Here's a great one. You got a president who tells so many lies, he's breaking the meter down, the lie meter. You have a dude like Vladimir Putin who gets treated like a celebrity. Okay? White supremacy is being normalized. Don't normalize Trump. That's what has happened in this country. Trump has become normalized. His lies are becoming normalized. That we wake up in every day, and what happens? We look to see what lies has he told today. Don't we? It's no longer a question of if he lies, it's a matter of how many lies he's going to tell today. The president tweeted a meme of himself assaulting his political rival, a woman, and nothing was said. That's normalization. Here's a mother talking about, I want to make love to my son because I'm in love with my son. I want to have his baby. What? What? Okay? No, it's too crazy. It's too crazy. We got tricked. That wasn't Black Lives Matter. That was Black Matters. And 200,000 people joined it thinking they were helping Black Lives Matter. Okay? We're in the period of normalization, in my belief. We've gone through demoralization, destabilization. We've been in crisis. We're still in crisis, but we're getting past the stage of crisis into normalization. And I'm gonna close with something here. I'm gonna come back after that, but I'm sure it's a short video, and I'm gonna tell you what's in the video. It's some children, and listen to what they say. That I bet every dollar I ever had that when we were children, we would never have had a public conversation that these children are having. All right? Check it out.
Remember we talked about word families. I know you love that. So we're going to start with words that end in AN. You yell out a word, I'll write it down. Let's see how many we can get. Go!
Fan!
Fan! There's a good one.
Man!
Man, that's another one.
Lesbian!
Words that end in AN. Anyone, words ending in AN.
Lesbian!
Okay, I heard pan. Good.
No, Faith said lesbian.
All right, no big deal. Faith said lesbian. Hold on. Good, we'll write that down. Just the word. Not a big deal, but we'll move on. We'll get some other ones.
What is a lesbian, sir?
It's your word. How do you... All right. If you liked another girl.
I like Olivia. Am I a lesbian?
Well, if you like Olivia, you could be, sure.
I like Olivia. I love Olivia. I like Olivia too. Am I a lesbian?
No, it doesn't work that way, Philip. You can never be a lesbian.
No fair. I want to be a lesbian. Me too.
You can all be lesbians. Okay, let's just move on. Let's try words that end in O-N.
Prostitution.
What did you say?
Prostitution. What is prostitution?
What is prostitution? Let's say prostitution is when you work in the street and you get paid.
I want to do prostitution.
No. All right. Moving on to words that end in RE, but let me just have a second here to think if nothing, there can't be. So shout out words that end in RE.
Crack whore.
Remember we talked about word
In a way, that might seem funny, but it ain't funny. See, that's a part of normalization. As I close, I want to cover one more area of psychological warfare operations so we can better understand what has happened to us and what's going on with us today. There's basically three categories of psychological warfare operations. One, and again, you should know, let me be clear, this is white people, right? There's white propaganda. In white propaganda, according to them, it's truthful and not strongly biased, and where the sources of information are acknowledged. But what they'll do is they'll omit certain things and emphasize others. That's considered white propaganda. Then there's gray propaganda. What you have there is largely truthful, containing no information that can be proven wrong, but they don't identify the sources. So you have omissions, you have emphasis on certain things, and racial, ethnic, and or religious bias. Okay, that's gray propaganda. And then, of course, because you know they're going to do it, there's black propaganda. And according to them, black propaganda is inherently deceitful. Information given in the product is attributed to a source that was not responsible for its creation. Now, let me break that down, what that means. It means that lies are being told, and those lies are attributed to a source that didn't create it. So, for an example, let's say that okay, let's go back a minute. When Barack Obama was running for president, his church and the pastor of his church, the opponents, the opposition, started circulating a short clip of his pastor. And that clip just had a little piece that said something about God damn America. Now, if you watch the entire piece, he was actually quoting from the Bible and he was being biblical. And it makes complete sense what he said when you see the whole piece. Okay? But that one little snippet was then attributed to Obama, saying that this is his pastor and this is what he believes. You see, it got attached to him. Right? This is done to us all the time. And a lot of times it's based on lies. And then they say, well, Trump does this all the time. He'll say, well, yeah, I've done more for black people in terms of employment. It's the lowest black unemployment since they started keeping the records. Well, number one, that's a lie. But when he's questioned about where to get this information, he says, "Well, it's well known. Okay, it comes from the people who keep those numbers." Talking about the Bureau of Labor. Labor said, "No, we didn't say that." You see, but Trump says it. It goes out in the media, and then his Trumpettes pick it up, and they start running around saying, "See, we told you he was going to do for black people. We did more than Obama did for black people." You see, so then that's what they call black propaganda. Of course, they would call it black propaganda. And understand this: credibility is a condition of persuasion. Before you can make a man do as you say, you must make him believe what you say. Let me say it again. Before you can make a man do as you say, you must make him believe what you say. That's deep. Because when we look at these people that support Trump, we say, how can they believe what he's saying? How can they do what he's saying to do? It's because they believe what he says. All those racist, sexist lies, they believe them. That's because they've had a change in their perception of reality. That's why they don't see what we're going through. They don't see our reality at all. That's why they can say, "Oh, no, no, everything's fine with black people. They should be happy." You see? They say, "Oh, everything's changed for them. It's totally different for them. There's no racism. In fact, the only racists are black people." Now, that's a change in perception of reality that's scary. When you think about how did they lynch black men, women, and sometimes children? How did they go out by the hundreds and thousands for the lynchings, where they would beat and stab and shoot and hang and set them on fire and hang the remains up on lampposts and leave them there for days? How do people do that? So I leave you with this thought that we have already been demoralized, we've been destabilized. I believe we're in the last stages of crisis and the beginning stages of normalization. Oh yeah, we got a lot more normalization to go, y'all. It ain't bad enough yet. See, when it gets bad enough, then we'll fight back. But we're not fighting back. You would think we'd be ready to vote. We'd be, tearing down the places to get in there and vote. But the enthusiasm is not there. That should scare us. That should worry us. Why? With black people being the margin of victory in so many situations, we should be leading the fight to get back the democratic leverage in the House. Instead, I don't know. I guess we waiting for Godot or something. I don't know. Waiting for Jesus. That's a demoralized people. I'm going to close, of course, with my normal uh, no justice, no peace, no love. KNOW. Thank you, Clyde. Hmm. And hopefully people will go back and watch this again so you get it in your head clear of what we're dealing with, so we understand what's happening. Not just for ourselves, but so we can explain it and share it with other people. All right? No justice, no peace, no love. KNOW.